I'd been checking the Australian news reports and stuff to see if there'd been any updates on little Gus. I caught onto this, I don't know how, but it was obviously just in the news, and how he's been missing, and it's been 20 days and there's only been a single footprint. But then there was another footprint found, but it didn't match or something. It's just so sad. I can't believe.
And where we talk about abductions, I've always found that quite an interesting theory, because having been on the ground out there, I need to explain to you just how difficult it is to get to that station. Like, he wouldn't have been picked up by an opportunistic passerby or anything like that. This is a station that I think 43 kilometres from the Barrier Highway. The Barrier Highway is a long, lonely road that mainly is used by truckers and people in their caravans travelling between New South Wales and South Australia. The thought of this is horrible, but if you were somebody who was going out there with the purpose of abducting Gus, this is a 2-hour undertaking, about an hour out to the station, an hour back to the highway. There's nowhere else you can go. And it's a really, really dangerous road, especially at that time of night.
2 different witnesses, 2 completely different stories, and 1 4-year-old boy who vanished without a trace.
A child walked out into red dust and simply disappeared. Before you scroll, if you want first-hand updates on this story and others, hit subscribe and turn on the bell now so you don't miss what comes next. On the late afternoon of September 27, 2025, 4-year-old Augustus Gus Lamont was playing in a sandpit near the homestead at Oak Park Station. That ordinary moment, a child at play within sight of home, became the hinge on which everything else turned. By the time anyone realized Gus was gone, minutes had stretched into hours, and the remote land that had been familiar to him did not give up a trace. Family members searched the property themselves before contacting police. That gap between first alarm and the official call has since become one of the most scrutinized elements of the investigation. Authorities later confirmed that Gus was last seen on the property that afternoon, and the formal searches that followed were among the largest the state has mounted in recent memory. What happened during those first critical hours is central to both the practical search effort and the questions now being asked publicly. According to the family's account, Gus's grandmother noticed he was missing around 5:30 p.m., and family members conducted a private search of the homestead and surrounding paddocks before contacting police at roughly 8:30 p.m. That 3-hour window matters because, in a remote, exposed environment, every minute can meaningfully change what can be found on the ground. Footprints are softened by wind, small items can be shifted by animals, and thermal differences that technology relies on can disappear with the cooling evening. Investigators must therefore reconstruct exactly what the family searched, in which directions, and for how long before formal resources were brought in. That reconstruction is not about blame, it is essential to determining which traces might still have been recoverable and which areas retained integrity by the time official teams arrived. Within days, the response escalated into a broad, coordinated multi-agency operation. Police, the Australian Defence Force, SES volunteers, specialist Aboriginal trackers, helicopter crews, drone teams and hundreds of local volunteers combed the region with the full range of available tools: vehicle grids, mounted and foot patrols, aerial surveillance, thermal imaging and meticulous photographic documentation. The area searched grew to hundreds of square kilometers as teams expanded and reprioritized based on new tips, environmental patterns and the realistic walking range of a 4-year-old over time. The scale of the operation reflected the seriousness with which authorities treated the disappearance and the desire of the community to do everything possible. Yet despite the manpower, machinery and expertise brought to the search, the landscape returned almost nothing that conclusively pointed to Gus's whereabouts. No confirmed clothing, no clear, continuous trail of footprints, no verified sightings beyond the family's initial account. The terrain itself was a relentless adversary. Oak Park Station sits in a sparse, dusty part of South Australia where featureless scrubland can stretch for kilometers and weather conditions can change rapidly. During the search, temperatures climbed into the mid-30s Celsius and sudden dust storms blew across the plains. Hot winds lift the fine red dust and can erase a faint footprint in hours. Heat and dust also reduce the effectiveness of thermal cameras and shorten drone battery life. Vehicles traversing soft ground risked getting bogged or accidentally disturbing fragile evidence, forcing coordinators to balance coverage with preservation. Searchers often covered long distances on foot, sometimes more than 20 kilometers in a day, but even repeated sweeps can fail to reveal an object or trail the land chooses to hide. These environmental realities help explain why even a massive, persistent response can return so little physical proof when the clock already worked against the search. Among the few early pieces of physical evidence logged by search teams was a small impression found roughly 500 meters from the homestead. That print briefly raised hope among volunteers, the thought that Gus might at least have left one trace. But forensic review ultimately judged the impression inconclusive. Later reports noted another footprint observed further away that did not match initial impressions and was likewise not confirmed as belonging to the child. In outdoor searches, an isolated print is only as useful as the context around it. A sequence of prints establishes direction and movement. An isolated or degraded impression raises more questions than answers. Forensics require controlled collection and comparison, photographed, cast, and measured, and even then environmental conditions can limit what a single mark can be said to mean. The inconclusive nature of the footprint evidence forced investigators to treat those early signs with caution and to prioritize rigorous verification over hasty conclusions. After an initial phase of intensive searching, authorities scaled back operations to review all gathered material and then return days later with a renewed, targeted effort. That pattern, search, consolidate, research, is common in complex missing person inquiries. The initial phase is driven by urgency and breadth. The next phase is about methodical re-examination, cross-referencing of reports, and the application of specialist resources where earlier sweeps might have left gaps. When teams returned, their work focused on a tighter grid and rechecked areas with new perspectives and refined hypotheses. That strategic return demonstrates disciplined investigation. Pause to digest the mass of information collected, then redeploy in a way designed to preserve what little integrity remained in potential evidence zones and to bring different detection techniques to bear. It is a sober reminder that finding answers can be as much about patient, methodical work as it is about raw manpower. As people sifted the facts, attention naturally turned to family dynamics and public statements. Who was where, what they did in those first hours, and how they described their actions afterward. Gus's grandmother has said she was inside the homestead with a younger child when she noticed Gus was gone. The household's account that family members undertook a private search before contacting authorities has been central to investigators' efforts to build a minute-by-minute timeline. Separately, the child's father lives some distance away and has remained publicly silent, which has increased public curiosity and the sense that there are gaps to be filled. Investigators caution against leaping from silence to suspicion. People respond differently under stress, and some will prefer privacy or need space. For detectives, the focus remains on corroborating witness statements with objective data, timestamps, phone records, vehicle movements, and any recorded footage that might place people in specific locations at specific times. Conflicting witness details and inconsistent timelines complicate that task, but they are precisely the sorts of contradictions detectives must probe to either reconcile or explain. The investigative focus gradually shifted from purely ground searches to careful scrutiny of family accounts and all associated records. Authorities formed a dedicated unit to examine every tip and piece of digital evidence. Dashcam footage, mobile metadata, aerial imagery, and witness statements, with the aim of reconstructing a reliable timeline. The change in emphasis does not mean search efforts ended. Rather, it reflects the reality that when the landscape yields few physical clues, the next most fertile area to examine is the human record. Who moved where and when, which vehicles passed the property, which devices recorded presence or absence. Properly handled, this work can reveal patterns that a single, degraded print cannot. But it also requires meticulous, patient detective work, and it runs against the natural impatience of a grieving family and a community desperate for quick answers. Public reaction to the lack of clear physical evidence has produced a range of theories about what might have happened. Some people suggest accidental wandering and exposure, others point to the possibility of third-party involvement or a custodial removal. online narratives have ranged as far as conjecture allows. Investigators have stressed that, to date, there is no public evidence that confirms foul play, and every hypothesis must be weighed against what is verifiable. Remote geography makes certain unfortunate outcomes more plausible: exposure, dehydration, or an accident. But the absence of expected traces in these scenarios complicates that reasoning. Conversely, human intervention remains a possibility to be tested, but without corroborating evidence, it must remain an investigatory line rather than an asserted fact. The responsible posture is to treat all plausible avenues seriously while avoiding premature public statements that could close off lines of inquiry or unfairly cast suspicion. Another modern complication has been the spread of misinformation. Within days of Gus's disappearance, altered images, unverified claims, and synthetic photos began circulating on social platforms. Each false claim is more than just noise. It diverts police time to debunking, fills tip lines with dead ends, and can inflict real harm on a grieving family. Detectives have repeatedly urged the public to rely on official channels and to forward credible, verifiable information rather than reposting speculative material. Communities can help by sharing only confirmed updates and by directing potential leads straight to investigators rather than amplifying uncertain content. That restraint both protects the integrity of the inquiry and shields the family from needless distress caused by false narratives. Throughout the investigation, the Lamont family has requested privacy while cooperating with police. That balance, a family's need to grieve and the public's demand for answers, is delicate and painful. Media attention, online speculation, and community concern create a pressure that families rarely asked for but must endure. At the same time, the community rallied. Vigils at the homestead, messages of support, and local volunteers joining searches underscored the deep emotional weight of this case. The human story, a small child, a family, a community, remains at the center of every fact and every lead. This disappearance is a test of endurance for detectives, volunteers, and a grieving family. The remote landscape makes timely, methodical searches essential and technically difficult. Small clues, a footprint, a scrap of fabric, need rigorous, transparent forensic handling. Digital and time-stamped evidence is especially valuable in a setting where the natural environment can erase traces almost instantly. Misinformation online harms the investigation and deepens a family's distress. Careful, verified tips are far more useful than speculation. Task Force Horizon remains active, and investigators continue to review all credible leads. The case remains open. If you have verifiable information, dashcam footage, time-stamped photos, or any concrete evidence placing someone or something near Oak Park Station on or around September 27th, pass it directly to the police. They are the only channel that can properly triage, validate, and act on credible information. Keep Gus's name alive with facts, not rumors. Keep pressure on the process with patience and verified details. And most of all, keep compassion for the family at the center of every conversation.